Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of our second season. My name's Alex Weiss. I'm your host. Bob Azarito, your co-host, is here. And we're going down to the wire with the elections. It's one more week till the elections. And
everybody's on edge.
Everybody's on edge. What's going to happen? The polls are talking about their, tied,
neck and neck.
And this is going to be an interesting ride for us the next few days, and to see what actually happens.
Yeah, and we've taken a little turn from our Deconstructors Club theme and focus, but these are issues that for a lot of people they began to deconstruct as a result of some of these issues that have come up in this election.
I mean, there's so many. Now that you bring that up, there's so many people that started their deconstruction in 2016.
Yeah,
I mean, serious deconstruction. They might have been questioning things before, but in 2016 they're like, you know what, I'm out.
Yeah,
I was one of them. I said, I'm out.
Yeah, so evidently, well, for sure, because the evangelicals who have been at the source of Christian nationalism, that there's a lot of people within evangelicalism that have just said, I can't go this road. I can't go down this road. This does not feel right.
Right.
And so, some of you may be those people.
Right.
And that has caused you to deconstruct in that area, but also then maybe begin to question certain other beliefs and ideas that you've had as a result.
It's interesting you're saying that, because I'm one that it feels really weird that we're going through this again.
Yeah.
And so in some ways I feel triggered about this whole process.
Interesting.
That there's days where I just don't even want to look at the news. I don't want to look at anything.
Right.
And there's other days, of course, I'm right on it, looking at what's going on. But there's just times where I'm like, you know what? I need to get peace of mind, because all of this is getting me anxious and getting me to feel like how I felt back in 2016, and which was very difficult. But, I was in a process of deconstruction already. But on the other hand, if it wasn't for 2016, I probably wouldn't even be sitting here right now. So there's processes that,
That's true.
that we can determine that will actually help us out in some ways. I'm not saying that in this election, if Trump wins, it's going to help us out. But I think that a lot of people are further on. I don't think that this is going to cause people to deconstruct. I think a lot of us back in 2016 are in this process already. I'm not saying that there aren't people that are going to in the future, but I don't think in particular it's because of the elections this time around. I think this time around we're dealing with something way more serious than last time. Why do I say that? Because last time when Trump came into office, at least he had some guardrails. He had some people that were there, that many were conservative, Republican, but yet they were for democracy. They were for the Constitution.
And kind of operated sort of like a governor on him a little bit, a little bit of a protection.
Right.
And held him back from certain actions that he may have taken last time had there not been a John Kelly, or had there not been these different folks who had a different understanding of democracy than what Trump had, what he really wished for. And now they won't be there.
That's the point. This time around, he's going to get loyalists all around him. And this is what's going to make him even more dangerous.
Why do you think so many people, Republicans who are voting for Donald Trump, why do you think so many people aren't seeing the danger of him and how he talks about becoming president and what he plans to do? Why do you think people are thinking, oh, it'll be okay?
And he says it so blatantly.
And that's what surprises me.
Yeah.
Every time I hear something,
I have the same question. No. I want to talk about it. I do want to talk about it.
I don't have I don't understand how people can't pay attention to these things that he's saying.
There's so many red flags.
I'm going after my enemies. I'm going to prosecute those.
The enemy within.
I'm going to prosecute people in this country for the things that they say.
Right.
I mean,
which we got a First Amendment right.
Isn't that the most important First Amendment of democracy that you actually, and would Trump be able to say even what he's saying if we didn't have the First Amendment? Because so much of what he's saying,
he spews his hatred, but hey, he got the First Amendment right behind him, like anybody and everybody else. So to begin to go after people that dissent or against or resist what he's saying and publicly come out and now be afraid for their lives, to use the National Guard as your own personal militia, it's horrific to even think about something like that.
Right. And the hard part is that there are those, I've heard speeches and presentations by people who claim that if Kamala Harris gets in, that will be the end of our democracy.
How?
I don't know. I don't
understand.
Well, I think there's some sense in which she is going to censor free speech. She is going to take away the right to bear arms. She is the one who's going that the Democrats are the ones who are a threat to our democracy.
Yeah, because they're flipping the narrative. Now that doesn't mean I'm an independent voter. I'm not a Democrat. So there's things that I have against the Democratic Party and the establishment. I'm not 100% in agreement with Kamala, but yet I know from someone that's an independent coming from the right, I know for a fact that the agenda of the Democrats is not to become fascists.
Right.
And establish a fascist government. We know blatantly that that's what Trump wants, because that's what he's saying.
Right. So here we are expressing our anxiety over what we're
John Kelly.
What we're worried
about. We're just talking about John Kelly.
Right.
You know, the general comes out, four-star general that was chief of staff. And he comes out saying that Donald Trump approached him and to ask him if he could be a general like Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler, he said it.
Why can't my generals be like the ones that Hitler had? Which is basically
did
whatever he wanted.
Said that? Could you imagine if Kamala would have said that? Biden or Kamala. See, that's the whole point. It's like, and if that would have occurred, or if what they think is going to occur with Kamala, why didn't it occur the last 4 years with Biden? Does that make sense? It's like what they're saying. How are you saying it? Like, let's talk about a little bit the NAR. Cheon's speech right before the insurrection on January 6th, January 5th, they had their prayer rally. Right. And he talks about how the next 4 years, which already happened, right? We're concluding with that with Biden, was going to be disastrous for our nation in the sense of how
evil will reign.
I was what are these people talking about?
Right. That's kind of the problem, as well as the way in which things are spun. So General Kelly, his words are spun by the Trump supporters as, well, he's just a disgruntled person because Trump fired him. He's angry now, so he's making this stuff up about Trump. They don't believe him. They don't believe people who are saying things, and when they hear Trump say things, they just think, well, that's just the way he talks. That's not really what he's going to do. What he was saying there is he wish he had generals that would actually support him and not just undermine what he's trying to do. So that's the way Trump supporters are going to spin that. And everything that Trump says,
and that's the way they do spin it.
They do spin it. And everything that Trump says that sounds a bit problematic, first of all, Fox News spins it
all the time,
and so that supports people spinning it to just be, that's not what he has in mind. What he has in mind is putting a stop to this government that is just out to take your money and out to take your rights and out to take your freedoms. So that's the way they spin all of what Trump is going to. And that's why Trump can say whatever he wants, because it will people will spin it in their heads, and so will Fox News.
Going back to what you had talked about, what are these people thinking after they're hearing what he's saying and they still vote for him? Basically, a lot of these people, from what I'm hearing with different interviews going on with different news networks, with undecideds, that's what they call them. One of the biggest thing that they're talking about is the economy. That's their big thing. they don't even care about the rest of the stuff. It's like, as long as I get to pay my bills and I'm not, just trying to survive, that's what's more important to me right now. Honestly, he says what he says because he's just that way.
Right.
But he's going to make me, it's very selfish, irresponsible, and individualistic.
Right. So let's look at that for a minute, because I don't know if they're actually thinking about the economy, because they're by all markers, Biden has done amazing with the economy. Interest rates are low. Wages are up. Jobs are up. All these things. What they're actually thinking about is my ability to buy groceries and buy gas is more difficult today than it was 6 years ago. Mm-hmm. That's it.
Yeah.
Not thinking about why was it easier back then?
Right.
What was going on back then? What's going on now? Why are groceries up? And so what they're saying is,
which is very nuanced. There's way more than just the president impacting
absolutely.
This.
So what they're saying is that that those in charge now are responsible for the more difficult time that I'm having. So they think, so these people are poor.
Right.
These people that are talking are
most
poor.
Most of these undecided.
And we know that poverty is a problem in this country, no question. But really, do they think that they're going to be better off as poor people under Trump and the Republicans than under the Democrats, who at least have a philosophical wish, not that they follow through on it,
right,
but a philosophical wish to take care of those who are struggling.
Yeah.
I just think that it's a very knee-jerk reaction to their predicament. And I think they actually do have a legitimate complaint about being in this country and not even being able to afford rent.
Yeah, and
they have a legitimate complaint about that.
But what gets me though is, although I understand that, because I've been there.
Yeah,
I know what it is to go to live day to day, and not even just paycheck to paycheck, but day to day. I know what it is to struggle have a major struggle economically. I know what it is to even have something out of the ordinary occur in your life and set you back and put you into major debt. All of those things I understand, but I also understand that if I'm only thinking about myself mm-hmm. and my needs and what I need, that is not going to help myself in my condition.
Right.
I know that I need to do my part when it comes to our society, our community, all of us together. This is the problem that we have in America. Or in the United States, is that we have such an it's called hyper individualism.
Yeah.
This is the problem that we have here.
Right.
And that's the reason why we can't even see beyond ourselves and our needs, even though our needs are important. I'm not in any way ignoring that. But yet, can we just for one moment step back, like you're saying, think objectively about things?
Yeah. And
because if our democracy is on the line, the person that's in charge that wants to be a fascist doesn't give a hoot about.
There's no guarantee
about
that person is going to come along and decide that you are more important than his own pocketbook.
That's right.
Or helping out the billionaires who are funding his pet projects. What are the checks on that fascist leader, on that totalitarian authoritative leader? What are the checks on that person to just not see the country as his personal bank account?
And actually, it's going to affect so much more those that are in poverty, those that are low income, because he doesn't care about them, period. So the exploitation of that is going to get even higher.
And what's going to happen the day when those who have been speaking out on not having enough, what's going to happen the day when you no longer are allowed to speak out?
Mm-hmm.
When you're no longer allowed to do a rally,
Well,
When
now you can complain about it. You can definitely.
What happens when you're not allowed to complain about it? When all of a sudden you can't hear, just, Navalny's wife was interviewed on a couple of news stations recently. He's the one who was killed in Russia for speaking out again. He was the resistance movement in Russia, and he was recently killed. And
supported by so many
people. And she is now trying to carry on his legacy and trying to continue the movement. But what happens when the Navalny's of this country are no longer allowed to speak out? What if they're no longer allowed to question the government, to question what's going on, to push for change? What if you can't do that anymore? Because now you have a fascist leader whose ways and will is the only thing that's important. Right. And all that he wants are generals like Hitler had, generals who will do whatever he asks, no matter if they disagree with it or don't think it's right or think that's a problem or think that that's actually against the Constitution. What happens when he gets generals who will follow his orders no matter what? Like he wanted to shoot those Black Lives Matter crowds, in the legs, shoot them in the legs. So what happens when the general goes, well, okay.
Right. Because he's not.
And is no one worried about that?
Yeah.
Is no one worried? No, everybody hears Trump say, I want to be a dictator on day one. I want to be unquestioned. I want to be able to to be able to break the law. But because the Supreme Court says that the president's not accountable for anything the president does while in office.
And sadly, we're so polarized, Bob, right now that you're saying that, I can already hear or read the responses to what you're saying. Well, they deserve it. Why they're trying to make our country Marxist. They're communists. They need to be killed just like communists were. I mean, that sadly, I'm just kind of thinking how they're thinking,
But
or saying
we have a
thinking.
country where you can actually believe in Marxism and think think it's right. It's right. That's the reason we are a free country.
That's what makes our country
absolutely
our country. In essence, the freedom that we have, the democracy that we have, is because we're given the freedom
to share your point of view.
Yeah, to talk about it. Okay, this person probably does believe in Marxism, but I don't think their goal is to make the whole country a Marxist country. But because of what they believe in, they have the right to be able to say what they're saying. And everybody has a right to protest.
Right. And there's some limitations.
Most definitely.
I can't go into a crowded
vandalism and,
I can't
violence.
Go into a crowded movie theater and yell fire. I can't do that.
Right.
That's because I'm endangering other people.
Right.
So I'm not allowed to incite a riot like Trump did on January 6th. I'm not allowed to do that. That's against the law.
See, that is not the First Amendment right. The First Amendment right is, okay, go all the way to the stairs and protest.
But
the moment you crossed the line.
And if I incite someone else to riot, I am responsible. So let's go to the NAR, who have said they were against January 6th riot, who have said out loud, all of the leaders who were there, we are against it. We speak out against it. We didn't want that to happen. But all the things we said brought them right up to the doors, and then we just let them go. We don't take responsibility for the way in which we're inciting others to violence.
Okay, you were there.
Yeah, they were there.
If you were there, which they were.
That's right.
And in flags and all.
Yep. Churning people up with the emotional energy that happens in those kinds of settings.
Yep.
And then they don't apologize.
Right.
They don't say
or
we were
appalled.
Wrong. They were appalled.
Aggrieved.
They were appalled, but they don't take responsibility for leading that crowd in that direction. Trump doesn't take any responsibility for leading the crowd in that direction.
No. And they won't either. They won't. It's really sad, because these are the people that claim, right, they're doing God's work. Yet the moment, it's not God's work that's manifesting. They're like, either it was the devil,
right?
or what was some of them even? What was one of the things that they were even saying? That was the ones that were really there were Plantons from what's that group called again? My goodness,
Antifa.
Antifa.
Yeah, that it wasn't really the Republicans. It wasn't really the Proud Boys. It wasn't really the
the moment they started arresting them. Here you go.
Right. It was the Democrats who had churned up the violence just so that they could blame. That's what I'm saying. Everything can be spun.
Right.
And that's why it's so difficult to have a conversation,
right?
Because, oh no, that wasn't that was this group. Well, where's your evidence for that? We have the Oath Keepers in jail. We have the Proud Boys in jail. Where's Antifa?
Right.
Well, they were there. How do you know that?
Yeah.
How are you, on what basis are you drawing those
and because
conclusions?
It's so absurd now with all of the YouTube conspiracy theories, well, they escaped. Mm-hmm. Biden got them out.
Yeah. So so we have we have these 5 weeks where we've tried to hopefully expose people to some of the details of this movement, this Christian nationalist movement, this ideology, and I think we have had some really good conversations with Kurt, and we had a great conversation with Matthew, and then we've talked about what's going on. It's very difficult because I think it's just been recent that people have started paying attention to this new apostolic reformation group,
right?
And we've talked about the fact that it's really you can't call it a cult. You can't call it a typical traditional cult, if there's such a thing. It's not wrapped
like the
around
Jim Jones.
Yeah, now it's not wrapped around one person of blindly following. It's wrapped around an ideology,
right?
Which makes it so much more dangerous and concerning, because an ideology takes on a life of its own, no matter who is in the pot. And so let's talk about that a little bit. This ideology that is saying we as Christians need to take over the world. These 7 mountains,
right,
that can control the world and control the leaders in all these nations. Mm-hmm. And therefore, the will of Jesus, the will of God, can then become the law of the land, right? So that would you say that's kind of the ideology? That
it's a theocracy. That's what they want. They want God to rule the world that way through, of course, their own perspective and angle.
So probably the clearest example of that happening in the Bible will probably be the Tower of Babel. Here were these people that were getting together to build a tower, to build a city and a tower that could reach into heaven. Mm-hmm. And where reaching into heaven is where God would then reign, supreme. And God undermines the whole project.
Right.
By
he pulled the plug on that thing.
And then pulls the plug. And of course, this is allegory. This is metaphor. But he pulls the plug on the whole thing and changes their language. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, they can't understand each other. And now God's happy. What? Now God's happy. They can't give each other orders. Right. They can't control the world. So they leave.
Right.
They go in opposite. They go all over the world, go in different directions. And God is glad. That is so opposite
to the 7 mountain mandate.
To the 7 mountain mandate. I can't think of anything more opposite than that to the 7 mountain mandate than the Tower of Babel story, because it's the diversity that God loves. Mm-hmm. Evidently, it's the differences of language and culture and understanding and perspective. Mm-hmm. And yet the NAR believes, no, we need everyone.
Right.
under the same ruler, over the same rule. But that ruler, if that ruler is Jesus, Jesus let go of power.
Right.
Let go of control. Let go of central, command. Jesus, go into all the world. Mm-hmm. It is not bring all the world in. Right. It's go and teach them to love one another, be kind to each other. All of the things that Jesus modeled in Jesus's life, Jesus sent his disciples out to proclaim to the world. It's the opposite of the NAR movement. And that's what's so disturbing.
Well, they're not following the Jesus of the Gospels.
That's right.
They're following the Jesus of Revelations. Because the Jesus of Revelations, and again, you mentioned allegory and there's metaphor everywhere. Mm-hmm. And there's reasons why it was written the way it was written. But they literally still believe this is a futurist movement.
Yeah.
So being it a futurist movement, they believe that Jesus that they're following, the political, the one that's going to come kill off the enemies and establish his kingdom in a, you would say, forceful, violent way, is kind of where they're in that shift. Now, they still interpret that spiritually in the sense that we're not going to do it through firearms, but we're going to do it spiritually. Although some of them are starting to go that direction, literally. Mm-hmm. And I had sent you an article about, one of their leaders, I think it's Eric Metaxas or something, and what he wrote about Dietrich Bonhoeffer and how Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he's going to actually release a movie in November that talks about him being a pastor, theologian, and an spy and assassin.
Yeah, spy and assassin. Oh my gosh.
And literally, I think one of the images was the Bible and a gun on top of the Bible. It's like that is the image of Christian nationalism right there. Mm-hmm. It's a violent movement. And even though they call it spiritually violent, but the point here is that to be honest with you, what is spiritual violence? When Christ didn't even seek out spiritual violence. Mm-hmm. Christ's life was always to lay it down.
Yeah.
Always to, he never resisted it with violence. And that's the whole point. We're observing that is a movement that is not following the Jesus of the Gospels, but is interpretation of Revelation. That's the Jesus that they want to follow. That's dangerous. Mm. It's all based on a literalist interpretation, because that's what they really are, literalists. Even to the point where in the Old Testament, kings, they want to see that happen again because they want to be the prophet speaking and influencing, hearing from God, speaking to the kings that they have to do what God says. But really, it's their agenda.
Yeah, and it is alarming and confusing. I think a lot of people are confused because they're using all of these Christian terms.
Right.
They use the name Jesus, but they mean something very different than the Jesus of the Gospels. I like what you said. It's this metaphorical, allegorical Jesus of Revelation. Mm-hmm. And this is the Jesus that they're bringing to earth. So they don't really like the Jesus of the Gospels.
Yeah, that's not the one they emphasize.
Jesus of the Gospels is a peaceful, lay down your sword,
loving, caring, compassionate, merciful, all of
crucified,
lay down his life, peaceful, like you're saying. Yet there's nothing that you see that compares. You see the Jesus of the Gospels that compares to this movement.
So evidently they believe, although maybe they don't believe, but I think Cheon and some of the other ones talk about people becoming Christians. So did they actually think that this approach, shofars, yelling, shouting down the demons, forcing their way to the top of the mountain, controlling nations with their mandate, their point of view on all of these different issues and policies, did they actually believe that is the way to make converts to Jesus? Is that really going to draw people to Jesus? Or are they just going to force people to believe? Are they just going to force people to accept Christ into their hearts? What are they thinking this process, this way, this approach is going? What's the result?
I honestly don't think, being a part of that movement years ago, I never seen really an intention or a purpose of forcing people to become believers. They never really did that. That was not their objective. Their objective was forcing their agenda. And then the results would be people would become believers. That's what they really
How do they think that's going to lead to people becoming believers? It's so, Jesus never took that approach. And the interesting thing is the early church was called the people of the way.
Right.
It was a way of being. It was sharing. It was giving.
That's
it
what was
kindness.
Outstanding about them.
It wasn't control. They didn't go to Pilate. They didn't go to Rome and
they weren't
enforce it. They were a movement of acceptance and inclusion and love, and people very different from each other became a part of that movement.
Yeah, like when Philip went to Samaria, he didn't, take a group of people to do a whole prayer movement to tear down principalities and powers and displace.
No. You know what they thought? They believed Jesus did that. They didn't believe that they had to do it.
Right.
They went to spread the good news that Jesus had broken through, and now we can love one another and accept one another, include one another.
That's right.
That's what they believe. But
even more so because there were Samaritans that were rejected by Jews. And now they're saying, this is the good news. You're a part of the family
and the
now.
Gentiles.
That was even more so.
That was a big problem when they came back to the council in Jerusalem. They decided that they don't have to become Jews to be accepted by God.
Yep.
I guess they don't have to. Yep. And the question for us is, do people have to be Christians, be a part of the Christian church, be a part of the Christian movement in order to be loved and accepted by God? Of course not.
Now that you're saying this, how could Paul be a colonizer? When he went into the Gentiles to present the good news, he never took his Jewish culture and imposed it on them.
Did not.
On the contrary, he advocated for them to the council of the Christian Jews to tell them they don't have to follow this stuff. They're a part of the family of God with their Gentile ways, not abusive or hurtful ways, but
and the funny thing
are outside of being Jews.
And they had 4 little things, and tell them if they don't mind.
Yeah.
Don't do these few things because just for respect to your Jewish.
Yeah, what was it? Yeah, I remember that.
Don't eat meat offered to idols, and a few of the things that were
meat with blood and something like that. A few
things,
strangled.
Things that were really
still very Jewish,
and very close to their hearts. Right. So all the request was from the council was ask them for these things, but the answer was, you know what? They don't have to become Jews.
Yeah.
I mean, the proclamation of Paul was that Jesus did something and proclaimed you loved, forgiven, welcome, and included.
Right.
And they said, whoa. But it was also contrary. It wasn't just it wasn't really contrary to the Jewish religion. It was contrary to the idea that my religion is what makes me acceptable to God.
Right.
That's what it was contrary to. And it was also contrary to the Roman religions that they would say it's my worship.
They called them atheists because they didn't believe, the Christians that is, and the Jews, because they did not believe in polytheism.
Right. Or in that Caesar was God, or that Jupiter needs to be worshipped. So in a way, the Christians were called atheists because it looked like, although it wasn't, it looked like a rejection of all religion.
Right.
All it was a rejection of the idea that it was your religion that made you okay with God.
Right.
And what it said was, if you're human, God's okay with you.
Right.
And that
That was what the wall that was torn down.
That's the wall.
What Paul talked about, or the writer of Ephesians chapter 2.
That's the wall.
The wall that kept us separated. So we're talking about all this, right?
Yeah.
Yet you look at this movement, and this movement is exclusionary.
Absolutely.
So that's what makes this movement
and
so
it's
dangerous.
only Christian. It's only the Christian religion.
Yep.
It is only the Christian religion that's acceptable with the Christian kinds of moral. Now, there's nothing immoral about Christianity. Some of those are fine.
Right.
You know, don't murder, don't kill. That's not really even Christian. That's like Judeo. It goes back, and it goes back even further than that. And lots of cultures had laws against murder and that sort of thing. But the idea that that you had to be Christian, you had to be a part of the Christian church, and it's the Christian church that's going to take control, where the only actual legitimate religion is Christianity. That is not Christian.
Right.
That's not Christian. That's not Jesus. That's not what Jesus, and that's not the early church. No. That is not what they were proclaiming.
No, the early church lived a lifestyle, like you were saying, they were called from the way, followers of the way. They lived a lifestyle that was attractive. Mm-hmm. And the reason why it was so attractive and it grew so quickly was because of how they cared for people.
Right.
They weren't looking to take over the world. They were looking to care for the world.
Right. So here I'm going to say something that's going to sound really weird to a lot of people, but the most Christian thing about America is our pluralism. Because what that says is,
and that's what's being threatened, by the way.
Of course. But that's the most Christian thing about us. Mm-hmm. That is the most, and it's something that has to be unpacked a little bit, because what it's saying is there's no superior religion.
Right.
That's what it's saying.
Right.
That all religions have flaws.
Mm-hmm.
Religion is, some good, but the worst part of the religions, the worst part is their superiority.
Right.
The worst part. And unfortunately, you see that in religions. Mm-hmm. You can see that in Islamic fundamentalism. You can see that in Jewish you can see that in Christian fundamentalism. Mm-hmm. You can see the idea that, you know what? We're the only legitimate religion.
Right.
And as soon as you begin to think that, you have lost your way. You've lost the way, because the way is, I'm not okay because of my religion. I'm okay because of God's love for me, and God's forgiveness, and God's kindness, and God's inclusion. That's the good news. Mm-hmm. So the problem with the new apostolic reformation, it's confused Jesus and a religion. And even if that religion is Christianity, that's not our hope for the world.
Right.
The hope for the world is the way of Jesus, mm-hmm. which means that no one is left out.
Right.
That's the hope for the world. And that's what
the good news.
That's the good news. And that's the way I think the early church started.
Right.
With that kind of understanding, that kind of aha moment was understanding, because Jesus wasn't a Christian.
No, he wasn't. He was
and
Jew.
Jesus was kicked out of Judaism.
Right.
He was killed outside the walls. He was viewed as a traitor to his own religion.
Right. And as much as people don't want to believe this or accept this, Paul, his whole perspective, his whole objective was never to establish Christianity.
Right.
All he wanted to do was reform Judaism, to include mm-hmm. Gentiles, to include people from the outside. He never thought, okay, we're going to establish a new religion called Christianity. And they were called Christians only because out of spite. Mm-hmm. They weren't being called Christians because they call themselves that, and this is what we're establishing, a new religion. All of that came to pass 300 plus years ago, where mm-hmm. that oppressed group became a superior religion by basically, or because of the empire.
The political, Constantine saw them as a way to gain power in the empire,
right?
And used Christianity, and of course Christianity used him as well to think that.
Kind of like Trump, right? Kind of like the whole...
A lot. A lot. And probably a lot like, behind Putin is the Russian Orthodox Church. Right. Behind Hitler was the German Evangelical Church. Behind these various dictators and totalitarian leaders is a marriage between some of the established religions and the connection with perceived power, because this is the way we can become the dominant religion. This is the way I can become the dominant ruler of the country. Right. And so together, they make a marriage that we know ends up abusing the world, which is what Rome did, Roman Empire did, and most of the empires did. They became forcibly the controllers of the world.
Oh, you see Germany, what was happening in Europe.
Take over the world.
Yeah.
Russia wants to take over the world. And if Trump's in power, he's going to want to take over the world.
Yeah, because that's the mindset of fascists. So.
That's the way fascists think.
Right. Well, Bob, we got a little bit of time here. We've been talking a lot about going from
I don't know where we went
NAR
today.
And then kind of the elections again. But in these last, minutes, what's your take before we leave? I mean, we'll be back and we'll talk a little bit more about the elections and who won, or at least hopefully we'll find out who won by then. The dust will settle and it'll be a bit clearer. But before then, just share your heart really quick on how you feel about the NAR, how you feel about Christian nationalism, and in particular, how you feel about, the elections going into that. And how do you think Christians should respond to this, at least those that don't stand with Christian nationalism?
So, there's a saying, and I'm a Presbyterian minister, and there's a saying in the Reformed world that's called that goes, we're reformed and always reforming, which means that we never can believe or think that we have reformed the final time, that what we know that now, we're done. And I think, though, that Christianity has been entrenched in a way of thinking about the Christian religion in a way that's very unhealthy. And we have struggled with pluralism in terms of our, kind of on the books beliefs and orthodox way of thinking. And it needs a rethinking. It needs a way of understanding itself that isn't so superior.
Right.
That doesn't believe that it is to be defended right or wrong, or good or bad.
So you believe a reformation is needed? Another reformation?
I think so the Apostolic Reformation, the New Apostolic Reformation, is definitely their way of reforming the world, but it's not reforming the church.
The church. Right.
It is a reform. It's like, we'll take over the world, and so we're going to reform the world through our influence. But the church isn't
reformed. That's the reason why they want to take over the world, because that's the result of the church not being reformed.
And we're afraid of certain things. We're really afraid of believing that somebody that doesn't think the way I think can actually be acceptable to God.
Right.
We just can't quite figure out, how do I believe in Jesus? How do I believe how do I have a Christian faith? And at the same time, not think that other people need to think the way I think about Jesus and about the Bible and about God in order for God to accept them. How do I do that? Because the way we were raised, We had to go get people to think like us in order for them to be okay with God. I point up there. I don't think God's up there, but you know what I'm saying? And I think there are a lot of people questioning that way of believing.
And that way of believing creates a supremacy.
It does. It is a
Christian
supremacy. Absolutely.
Because if it's our way is the only right way. If you're not doing it our way, you're wrong. You're lost.
You remember you're too young for this, but you remember One Way?
Yeah, I remember One
Way. You know, you did this, and that meant you were standing for Jesus.
Yeah,
One Way, One Way. Or I grew up in the Bill Bright. I found it. I found the One Way. And you have bumper stickers. Do you remember the bumper stickers?
The one way
bumper stickers. The I found it bumper stickers, and that's because people were going to ask you, "What did you find?" And then people made jokes. I never lost it. That kind of thing. But I found it meant I found the one way, and you can too. All you got to do is believe the way I believe. You say this prayer the way I said this prayer. Right. Confess your sins in the way I confess my sins. Right. Ask Jesus into your heart the way I asked Jesus.
Which is your little formula.
Your formula for, okay, God can accept me now.
Right.
I was raised that way. You were too.
Right.
And we've never, well, I shouldn't say we, but I would say that mainstream evangelicalism and even some parts of Christianity have never been willing to reform some of that way of thinking.
And I think that to close, I think that that's the key of how the church is going to really change is if we are open to being reformed.
Yeah, and that's what I like about what's happening, because I believe this has been needed. Mm-hmm. And maybe in some ways, do we have to have Trump be the president
for us
in order for us to be reformed?
I hate to say that.
Not.
Yeah,
I hope not.
Too,
I hope people realize they're not thinking far enough out. They're not recognizing if you just push these ideas, these NAR ideas, out into the future a little bit, you can see how damning it is, how undermining it is for what you're really hoping for.
Right.
Because I think what the NAR, the NAR, I think what they're hoping for is a world of peace and love and tranquility. I do, in the end, think that that's what they think is going to happen. But if they just take their ideas and ask, is that really going to follow?
Yeah.
It's
naive to think that way, but that's how they think. They really think that peace will come if we take over the seven mountains.
And Jesus said to Peter, put your sword down, Peter. This is not the way it's going to come.
Exactly.
Because those who live by the sword, even if it's a spiritual sword, will die by the sword. This is not the way. That's why Jesus died.
Yep.
He died because if Jesus knew that the sword would bring peace, he would have picked up the sword immediately and called how many angels did he say he could have called?
A legion of angels.
Legions of angels can come and take care of this little group.
Right.
But Jesus was able to see out far enough to know. And of course he was. And of course, around his death came a movement of peace.
Yeah.
And if we can't remember that, if we can't be followers of Jesus, we'll never find it by being a follower of Christianity.
And it's interesting how you said, is it going to take this election and Trump again? I hope not. But I remember in 2016, it really moved people to do a lot of deconstructing. Mm-hmm. What, if it happens again, what will happen? Will it finally move a large segment of the church, just the way it did with the Great Reformation, against, not against, but going... Well, yeah, against the ideologies of the Catholic Church 500 years ago. Are we at a tipping point where we, especially in this country, where we're saying there's a group of us that are saying no more. We don't want to associate ourselves in any way with the evangelical Christian church here in the U.S. But what is it going to look like? What is that? I don't even want to go there or speculate. But what I do want to say is that we still need to make that choice. And how we can begin to create a new narrative and establish a new narrative that says, that's not the Jesus we follow. We follow the Jesus that laid down his life, not picked up this sword.
Absolutely. And there needs to be a reform of the theological understandings and the biblical understandings to realize that the Bible does not teach the teachings of the new apostolic reformation. And it is but I understand that a lot of these theologies were developed in the time of Constantine. Constantine brought those bishops together to create these kinds of statements that he could then use to control the world. And it didn't bring peace. It brought war and destruction and violence around the world. That's what Rome took around the world.
And it started by excluding. These are heretics because they don't stand with us any longer.
So now we can do anything to them.
So, and the conventions, what they ended up doing when they came together was to create dogma. So that, why? So that anybody that doesn't believe this be excluded, the problem, and be the heretic that he is.
That's the problem. It's the superiority that came along with the creation of the dogma. Like the doctrines, they could have some value as long as you didn't think they were somehow superior to and needed to be followed in order to be acceptable with God. But that's the way evangelicals think, even today. That's the way they think.
Well, we're out a few days till, and I got to close up here because
we got to keep talking about this. We will keep talking about it.
We need to, yes.
Because I really am excited, and I don't know what's going to happen when we come back on the air again.
It's going to be interesting.
We will be on the other side of this election. Hopefully, after that, we'll have an answer. We'll know who's it'll be a settled thing. But the work will continue. The kind of work that we're talking about will continue. And
it needs to.
And the encouragement to me is this rise of Christian nationalism, this rise of the new apostolic reformation has brought a lot of new voices into the public square, into the game. Whereas before, it was all behind the scenes. I think there's a lot of new voices, a lot of new books out, a lot of people who are beginning to wage into this area. Matthew Taylor's, of course, one of them, but many others as well that are beginning to think about what's going on.
All right. Well, we're going to leave you all because
I need to go have a nap.
Because when we come back, hopefully we'll have things much more clear on what's going on. But hey, thanks for tuning in. Let us know. We need feedback from you. Let us know if this is actually helping in any way. We would love to hear back from you. Either it be through our TikTok. Our TikTok is only little promos. So we'd love for you to jump on to this podcast. And these episodes are on YouTube also, because those little TikTok are just little snippets and promos. But we'd love for you to check out our past episodes where Dr. Matthew Taylor, huge episode that we had. Check it out. We're actually going to release, I think, a promo, or we've released already another promo of Dr. Matthew Taylor. So check us out. Let us know how things are going. Let us know, even if you're like with anxiety like us with the elections coming up, let us know how that's going. We'd love to connect with you in different ways. So, all right. Well, thanks for tuning in to this episode. We will be back soon. Take care, everyone.